The Hidden Truth: How a Spiritual Ritual Saved 4 Lost Children in the Amazon. They weren't saved by helicopters or GPS or cutting-edge technology. They were saved by something many still dismiss as superstition: a spiritual ritual. For children, alone in the Amazon rainforest for 40 days. This isn't a movie script, it's real. While the world rushed on, deep within the jungle, unseen forces were at work. Forest spirits, ancestral chants, coca leaves, tobacco, ayahuasca. The jungle listened, and it answered. But why does no one talk about this? Why is the most powerful part of the story hidden? Maybe because it challenges everything we've been taught about faith, survival, and science. Maybe because this truth makes people uncomfortable. What you're about to hear could change how you see the world and how you live in it. Because if children could survive with the help of the unseen, imagine what you could do once you learn to listen. The flight and the fall. They say life's paths often unfold through invisible trails, where destiny whispers things we only understand long after they happen. That's how the journey of the Mukitui family, of the Huitoto people, begins on what seemed like an ordinary flight, but carried a deeper, almost spiritual calling. They didn't know it yet, but the moment they boarded that small plane, they were crossing the threshold between the world they knew and a reality where only those connected to the spirits of the forest could survive. It was as if the jungle, silent guardian of ancient wisdom, had already been waiting for them. And when the first thunder cracked through the stillness of the Amazon sky, it felt less like a storm and more like a warning from the unseen. At that moment, it wasn't just weather. It was the prelude to a rite, a natural, brutal, sacred medicine that would change everything. From a distance, some might call it tragedy. But through the eyes of the soul, it was rebirth. The plane soared over the vast green tapestry of the Amazon, carrying not just passengers, but generations of indigenous history and tradition. The pilot, tuned into nature's signs, couldn't escape the thick clouds swirling through the winds. And in the blink of an eye, a journey turned into a fall. The aircraft crashed into the forest with devastating force. The adults did not survive. The silence that followed wasn't just death, it was transition. The kind of transition only ancient shamans understand. As if ayahuasca had been served in a metaphysical way, and visions opened up within chaos. Only 4 children remained, orphaned in that moment but not alone. The forest had already begun to speak to them, subtly, in the way only the spirits of the jungle know how. Imagine the impact. For small bodies among branches, mud, silence, and an unknown world. But this wasn't just any forest. This was the same jungle that for centuries had embraced healers, elders, and spiritual travelers. The same forest that holds the secrets of plant medicine, where every root has a story and every shadow, a guardian. There, among vines and wide leaves, the true journey was beginning. While the outside world prepared to report a tragedy, the jungle was writing a new story, one not found in books, but in visions. In times when everything seems digital, this episode reignites something primal, profound. It's as if the spirits of the forest had summoned those children for something greater, as guardians of a forgotten wisdom. The plane crash, though brutal, was just the doorway into a process of near-shamanic transformation. Some say the jungle kills, but it also heals, guides, and teaches if you know how to listen. And maybe the children knew this instinctively. The body may have been afraid, but the spirit recognized its origin. The medicine wasn't in bottles, but in the belly of trees, in the scent of crushed leaves, in the calls of the animals. In the midst of grief, a leader emerged. The eldest, Leslie, unknowingly became a bridge between the visible and the invisible, as if ayahuasca flowed through her ancestral blood, whispering what to do. And she listened. She listened with her heart, her instinct, her soul. What many would call misfortune was, in truth, a calling. The forest doesn't receive anyone by accident. Perhaps the old healers knew this. Perhaps, deep in the spiritual memory of those children, the chants of shamans still echoed. The flight that ended in a fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of an ancestral trial, worthy of the legends that echo through the villages. While the lights of the modern world blinked with alerts and headlines, the jungle had already begun its ritual. It was the start of an odyssey of survival and connection. And though the pain still throbbed, something deeper was beginning to awaken. And that's when the story starts to take a different turn, because what comes next, that's when everything changes. Survival in the jungle. The forest doesn't offer second chances. But for those who carry the blood of the ancients, it leaves clues, signs that only the attentive can decode. Leslie, just 13 years old, understood this far too quickly. It wasn't a choice. It was instinct. It was as if a spiritual force had awakened within her, an ancestral memory written into her Hui Toto blood. While many adults would have collapsed in panic, she stood firm. And there, between vines and silence, she turned fear into leadership. She knew she couldn't falter. She knew every gesture, every decision, was a line between life and death. As if guided by the spirits of the forest, Leslie began caring for her siblings with a precision no survival course could teach. She remembered the stories told by the elders, the forest recipes whispered by her grandmother beside the fire. That's how she found food where others would see only wilderness. Cassava turned into flour, wild fruits hidden beneath wide leaves, turtle eggs tucked among damp branches. Everything had meaning. That, my friend, is true earth medicine. Not the kind you buy in a pharmacy, but the kind you learn over time, with the eyes, with silence, with presence. And the most astonishing thing? These children, so young, accessed that knowledge as if they had unlocked a secret key within themselves. The forest was no longer an enemy, but a vast, living laboratory of healing and nourishment. And Leslie, with her almost spiritual sensitivity, became like a shaman in training, guiding, feeding, protecting. But survival isn't just about hunger. It's about fear, the kind that bites from within. And the jungle is full of unseen eyes. Snakes, scorpions, jaguars, insects born from nightmares. The stifling heat, the constant humidity, the pitch-black nights. Everything conspired against them, and yet they endured, sleeping beneath crumpled leaves, building makeshift shelters with branches and intuition. That's not just technique, that's connection. It's the kind of wisdom that comes from a spiritual place, where ayahuasca doesn't need to be in a cup, it's already in the blood, in the senses, in the way you move. The forest does not spare, but it teaches. And those children were learning its harshest and most sacred lesson: how to hear the silence of the jungle. Imagine for a moment being there. No packaged food, no warm bed, no flashlight, just darkness and the pulsing sound of nature all around you. Most people wouldn't last 2 days. And yet, for over a month, these 4 children survived. Not by physical strength, but by spiritual strength. By something invisible that went far beyond the body. The medicine that kept them alive didn't come in syringes, but in instincts cultivated over generations. As the elders say, when ayahuasca teaches you, it never leaves you. And even though they didn't drink the sacred brew during those days, it was as if they'd undergone a ritual of endurance, of courage, of connection with the unseen. Leslie, without realizing it, became a living symbol of a wisdom the modern world insists on ignoring. While many still search for answers in formulas and systems, those children showed us that a living intelligence exists within the forest. A spirituality that whispers through the trees and reveals itself to those with eyes to see. Their survival was, above all, a reconnection with their roots, with the medicine of nature, with the spirits of the forest who, perhaps, walked beside them night after night. And the most curious part? They had no idea that, beyond the trees, a massive rescue operation was underway, with men, helicopters, and even shamans trying to decipher the very signs Leslie was already interpreting. Intuitively. The search, while Leslie guided her siblings through the jungle with the wisdom of the ancients, on the other side of the forest, a grand movement was gaining strength. The Colombian army no longer saw the mission as a simple search. It had become a rescue with almost spiritual undertones. Operation Hope, as it was named, brought together soldiers, helicopters, sniffer dogs, and cutting-edge technology. But Brute force and GPS weren't enough. The jungle has its own rules, and those who don't respect its mysteries get lost. That's when the generals, even the skeptical ones, began to listen to the true experts, the indigenous peoples, those who speak the language of the forest, those who know where each shadow lives and which plants reveal the presence of human life. These indigenous searchers didn't use maps, they used memory. Every tree, every trail was like a line of sacred code. They joined the mission with their rituals, their chants, their medicines. Many even took ayahuasca before setting out, to open their vision and feel the call of the forest spirits. They knew the jungle does not easily give back its children, but it also does not abandon them. While the military watched their radars, the indigenous watched the ground, the wind, the flight of birds. A crushed leaf could mean shelter, a change in smell, a sign that someone had passed through. Spiritual medicine was their equipment, and slowly the clues began to emerge. They found tiny footprints, a diaper left behind, a half-eaten fruit, subtle, almost invisible signs, things that would mean nothing to someone from the city, but to those connected with the forest, they were like glowing signs. It was as if the children were being guided, and at the same time, leaving an unconscious trail, a spiritual cry for help. The indigenous trackers said they felt presences nearby. One elder shaman even claimed to see the children in his dreams, surrounded by invisible protectors. This isn't an exaggeration. Anyone who has experienced an ayahuasca ritual knows how perception shifts. And those who grow up with it understand that the visible and invisible worlds walk side by side. What was happening there was not just physical. With the union of these two forces, military science and ancestral knowledge, the operation began to shift in frequency. The teams started to realize that yelling the children's names, as if calling them from a backyard, was useless. They needed silence. They needed connection. They needed to listen to the forest, not just speak to it. Many soldiers reported strange sensations. Chills, sudden intuitions, vivid dreams. They didn't know it, but they were being touched by the forest's spiritual medicine. A medicine that doesn't enter through the mouth, but through the senses. The spirits of the forest were there, active. This is not a metaphor. It's a reality indigenous peoples have known for millennia. And even if most don't understand it, those spirits were whispering directions. This operation became a symbol of something greater, the possibility of reconciliation between two worlds. Western technology, cold and calculated, was beginning to make room for a living, intuitive spiritual knowledge. And the results spoke for themselves. The signs increased. So did the hope. That jungle, once seen as impossible to cross, was starting to yield, as if it were testing the faith and respect of those daring to step into its heart. And every new clue seemed to confirm that something or someone was protecting those children. But even with all this progress, something was still missing. A bridge between worlds, a way to listen more deeply. And that is where the power of ritual comes in. Spiritual connection. There comes a point where logic must bow to the invisible. The search was already intense, but the jungle remained silent, mysterious, like a living entity watching every step. That's when the indigenous searchers decided to do what their ancestors had always done when faced with the unknown: connect with the spiritual. They gathered in a circle beneath a sky heavy with clouds and began their rituals. Ayahuasca, tobacco, coca leaves, not as drugs, as many still mistakenly believe, but as bridges. Sacred tools, true medicines that open the eyes of the soul. They weren't just praying. They were listening. They were seeking direct guidance from the forest spirits, those who know every root, every animal, every hidden trail. These rituals weren't symbolic. They were operational. While the outside world saw an exotic ceremony, the seekers knew they were accessing information from another dimension. Visions appeared, hazy images of paths, childlike voices echoing through the brush, pulsing lights between the trees. It was as if the forest had begun to speak. One spiritual leader described seeing, in his Miraceo, a child being guided by a feminine figure made of leaves and light. Many would call it delusion, but in that context, in that jungle, it was a map drawn with the ink of faith and the brush of ancestry. This medicine wasn't just for the body, it was spiritual, a medicine that aligned the senses with the unseen. During the ceremonies, time seemed to shift. The forest, once silent, began to respond. Sounds that had once gone unnoticed became messages. The song of a bird, the distant howl of an animal, the fall of a single leaf. Everything was a code. Everything was a sign. The indigenous said the spirits of the forest were allowing the rescue, as if the children were being protected, kept alive, until the seekers were spiritually ready to find them. This is hard to explain to those who live surrounded by concrete, but absolutely real for those who live in connection. Ayahuasca doesn't give you ready-made answers. It points you toward the path. And those paths were appearing, like roots opening beneath their feet. At first, the soldiers were skeptical, but they began to respect the rituals. Touched by the visions of the indigenous, they started to walk with more sensitivity, more silence, more listening. The jungle, once chaotic, began to make sense. It was as if a veil was being lifted. And here's the truth. Without that spiritual connection, the rescue might never have happened. Because this wasn't just about searching, it was about asking for permission. The jungle, guardian of the children, would not release its guests to those chasing only results. It required soul. It required humility. And it was in this atmosphere of reverence, among coca leaves and ancestral chants, that hope became faith, an active faith, the kind that moves mountains or opens trails in the jungle. These rituals marked the turning point, a reminder that some forces will never bow to human urgency, that true medicine, the kind that heals and guides, often lies in the simplest of elements, a wisp of tobacco smoke, an infusion of roots, an ancestral song sung in the early hours of dawn. There, in the heart of the forest, science and spirituality stopped being opposites. They became allies. Ayahuasca, the spirits of the forest, ancestral knowledge, all of it formed an invisible network that led the way to the rescue. And though the bodies had yet to be found, there was a certainty pulsing through the searchers. The moment was near. Something or someone was leading them toward a conclusion that would never be forgotten. The rescue, 40 days, a number that echoes like a symbolic call, almost biblical. 40 nights of jungle, hunger, and silence, but also of endurance, of faith, of deep connection with an invisible medicine that flowed through the air. And then, as if the heavens had answered the chants, the miracle happened. The children were found. They were alive, thin, dehydrated, injured, yes, but conscious, steady, like those who have passed through a deep ayahuasca ritual and returned stronger. The soldiers who found them could hardly believe it. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a reunion with something much greater, something ordinary words can't explain. The jungle had released its daughters, and the world, stunned, bore witness, as if watching the impossible unfold. The children were just 5 kilometers from the crash site, a detail that left the experts speechless. How did they survive for so long in such a hostile place? The answer wasn't in survival manuals, but in the ancestral wisdom running through the veins of little Leslie and her siblings. It was the forest's medicine, spiritual, silent, that guided them. Cassava, river turtle eggs, shelters made from leaves. Every act was a prayer in motion. The spirits of the forest didn't just protect them, they taught them. And honestly, that's worth more than any first aid course. Because what kept those children alive wasn't just technique. It was an invisible force, powerful one, the kind only those who've surrendered to a deep ritual truly understand. When they were finally found, the silence gave way to tears. Tears of relief, of pain, of gratitude, and awe. It was as if everyone knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a happy ending. It was a sign, a spiritual message, a message from the forest to the modern world. I take care of my own. The image of the children being rescued spread like wildfire. But few truly understood what had saved them. It wasn't just the army or the helicopters or the packaged food. It was living spirituality. It was the invisible ayahuasca working through the searchers' dreams. It was the wisdom of the grandparents still echoing inside the children. It was soul medicine, the kind you don't learn. You inherit. The commander of the operation admitted. It was a miracle. But the indigenous people said, with quiet certainty, the forest took care of them. And that phrase says more than any military report ever could. Because when respected, the jungle becomes a mother. A strict mother, yes, but a just one. And those children, even through their pain, experienced a rite of passage. No wonder those who saw them up close said they felt something different, an aura, as if they had crossed an invisible portal, guided by forest spirits, in a trance without brew, but with total surrender. Many called it luck. But luck is just the name we give to what we don't understand. What happened there was a dance between worlds, a living ritual, a miracle with deep roots. And as everyone celebrated, there was something in the air, a feeling that it didn't end there. Yes, the children were safe. But what about the world that watched? What would we learn from this? The jungle had spoken. The rituals had revealed their power. The spiritual medicine, long forgotten, had saved lives. And now, what would we do with that truth? This is where the story begins to shift. Because after the rescue comes the return. And with it, a reflection that could change everything. About spirituality, about ancestry, about reconnection. And that is what begins to unfold in the epilogue of this story. Return and reflection. The reunion with civilization was marked by flashing cameras, sirens, and hurried hands. But the children's eyes, oh, those eyes seemed to be gazing into another world. After 40 days under the silent care of the forest, something in them had changed. It wasn't trauma, it was awareness. The jungle's spiritual medicine had left marks no hospital could examine. And while doctors checked their vital signs, the shamans knew those souls had passed through a deep rite of life and death, light and shadow. No one returns the same from a journey like that. Every hug at their arrival carried more than just emotion. It carried the recognition that the invisible is real, that it acts, that it protects, and that the spirits of the forest, though they don't show up in medical scans, were there, present in every heartbeat. As the children received medical attention, it became clear how their bodies had adapted to survive. But even more striking was how their spirits had flourished. The forest's medicine hadn't only healed their hunger, it had nourished their hope. Many would call it instinct, but that would be too simple. It was ancestral connection, pure and direct. The way they built shelters, the way they knew what to eat and what to avoid, all of it revealed an intuitive knowledge they didn't even know they possessed. As if, in the moment of the crash, something had been activated. A wisdom that comes from the roots, from the earth, from the spirit. Something that ayahuasca symbolizes, but that also lives in the blood of those who respect the forest, even if they've never taken a sip. With every interview, with every testimony, a feeling began to grow in the air, that what happened wasn't just a survival story, it was a lesson. The children, even in silence, taught more than many global conferences ever could. They showed us that it's possible to trust the invisible, that there is a kind of wisdom, not taught in schools, but in leaves, and they reminded us how ignorant we still are. In the face of nature's vastness, the spirituality of indigenous peoples, ridiculed for decades, had proven to be essential. The ayahuasca rituals, the use of tobacco, the chants, the dreams, they were all part of the equation that saved lives. And now, how do we return to the normal world after this? The case became a symbol, not just of a miracle, but of reconnection. Many began to look at the forest with new eyes. It was no longer just dense wilderness. It was temple, living pharmacy, home of guardian spirits. The modern world, with its rush and concrete, was forced to pause and listen. And that, my friend, is already a sign of transformation. The forest's medicine may not cure everything, but it heals what matters most, our disconnection from the essential. And if one thing became clear from this story, it's this: the children returned, but their message remains. A silent message, spiritual, alive, like a whisper still echoing between the trees, asking us to remember where we came from. And so this story ends, or rather continues, because every return is also a beginning. And this family, now marked by a journey of pain and miracle, carries something rare, the living experience that spirituality can be just as real as the ground beneath our feet. The spirits of the forest weren't just legend. They were presence, they were guides, they were protection. And the world, if it has the eyes to see, will recognize this story for what it truly is: an invitation, a call to rescue not only children from the jungle, but the lost parts of ourselves, the parts we've buried beneath the city's cement and the noise of our screens. But thanks to the forest's spiritual medicine, they can still be found. Now tell me, after all this, do you still believe we're alone? That survival depends only on muscle, manuals, and luck? Or is it finally time to admit there's a medicine older than any lab, a spiritual wisdom that can't be tamed by machines or explained by formulas? What those children experienced was more than a miracle. It was a reminder. And you? Are you listening to this call? Or are you living on autopilot, disconnected from nature, from spirituality, from your own essence? When was the last time you silenced the world around you, just to hear your own soul? You don't need to get lost in a jungle to find your path again. All it takes is opening up to this hidden truth, that the forest spirits, the ancestral medicine, and the spiritual wisdom are still here, waiting for you to remember who you are. So tell me in the comments, do you feel like you're living connected to something greater? Or are you just surviving the chaos of everyday life? Share your thoughts. I want to hear your perspective on all this. And of course, if this story moved you in any way, if it sparked your curiosity, if it planted a seed, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next will show you this story isn't the exception. It's just the beginning.